Voilà, mais je vous propose que nous reprenions le cours de cette journée. Donc, c'est évidemment très très bref, mais simplement accueillir Robert Stadler, vous remercier. Et puis, je vais bien sûr laisser aux interlocuteurs présenter, mais préciser donc que Robert Stadler est en conversation avec Rosario Montalvo, professeur également au sein de notre Master Espace Communication. Et par ailleurs, l'un des deux membres fondateurs de Head-Genève, donc célèbre équipe ou couple de designers établis à Londres et que nous avons la chance d'avoir parmi nous au sein de ce master depuis maintenant quelques années. Elle est co-responsable de ce master avec Arno Mathies, qui est juste à ma gauche, lui aussi designer. Donc, vous pouvez ici sous son nom, c'est pas un nom d'agence ou de collectif, bien qu'il travaille souvent en collaboration avec nombre d'autres designers, mais vous pouvez sous son nom également découvrir beaucoup de très beaux travaux qui sont présentés dans toutes sortes de situations en Suisse, en France et ailleurs. Voilà, merci encore d'être là et très bonne conversation.
Hello. Donc, je vais plutôt parler en anglais, aussi parce que on est avec Rosario et que ce sera plus simple pour elle, enfin, la seule option. Cependant, voilà, donc merci, thank you, Robert, for coming. It's really a privilege and an honor to have you here with us. And I think it's very important also for you to, for everyone to understand also why it's extremely interesting for us to have somebody within the head and within the Department of Space Communication give a talk about his work, such as Robert, because we're a design course that is always seeking to find new formats of design and that explores this kind of intersection between space, objects, and media. So we see and we understand a lot of this kind of approach and practice to design in Robert's work. So for us, it's very important to be able to have that conversation with you and this kind of dialogue about what is design and where is design going and the kind of formats that exist for design. So thank you very much, and I think it's also really interesting for us to be the duo is complete with Rosario, because obviously Rosario comes from a design era and period of design which is very important and which I think you have a lot of comments as well that you would like to share later about how you saw and were doing your design with Roberto at the time, which is a similar time to Robert. So thank you. Maybe Rosario, do you want to also? I mean, all the introductions are done. That's yeah. You also have the mic, Rosario.
I think maybe Robert can start.
Of course.
We will be seeing the work and stopping for some questions and comments along the way.
Okay, hello. Thank you for the invitation and the introduction. Happy to be here too. So when I talked to Alexandra Vidal about what I should talk about today, she said that you would be interested in the variety of my work. So I tried to choose projects that are extremely different and that cover very different typologies of design, because this is what I was from the beginning on interested in relation to design, is that it's like a métier where you can have you can do it in very, very different ways, very free. So I try to do that all the time. So the first image you see here, it kind of represents this. Maybe it represents my mind. It's a mobile that I designed. And the mobile is called #mood, which is one of the most popular hashtags on Instagram. And it was supposed to show the mood that we experience on social media. Like we're lost, basically. Yeah, the idea, materially speaking, of this mobile was to do something different from a traditional mobile, which is always an object hanging on a string that tries to be transparent, but in the end, sometimes you almost fix the string more than the object because it's still there. And here, where the object is hanging from is just the same as the object itself. So it's all, it's a nylon cord actually that is reinforced in some areas.
I think it's the green one. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so this was a project I did. I will actually not talk about years. It's not chronological anyways, and I'm very bad in remembering years. Anyway, the idea for this project was kind of a fiction of a volcano that spits out things in the air, and then those things land on the ground and they form more or less recognizable things. Sometimes things that look like a sofa or an armchair, and sometimes just a thing. And this is what the pieces actually look like. And this shows also one aspect in my work that it always comes back, even if I don't do it on purpose, but I always like to work on kind of show a kind of ambiguity of what is natural, what is already there, or what is shaped by nature, and what is actually shaped by the designer's hand. So these pieces, they have this kind of ambiguity of a random shape, but in the end, when you look at it, and even more when you experience the piece, when you sit in it, then you feel and understand that it's actually all 100% designed. So yeah, it's probably the big one is actually the most illustrative of this idea. It's kind of a fusion between different ways of seating. Sorry, I go back again. It's like you will have something like a bench, and you also have something like a chaise longue, and you have a third one which is more like a three-dimensional carpet, and they are all three morphed together in this object. Yeah. I work with really incredible craftsmen for this. As you can see, this is all upholstered leather. This is maybe edition 7 or 6. Edition 1 was still full of pleats, but we were already happy with it. We thought it looked great, but they got better and better. And oh, actually, I can look here. Okay, this is a strange person called Philippe Catherine. I don't know if he's popular in Switzerland or not. And Philippe is a friend, and he, well, I got invited actually to do a project in Centre Pompidou, which is part of a cycle that combines artist or architect or designer together with someone from the stage, from live stage, which can be a musician or an actor, performer. And Philippe is kind of all of this, so I invited Philippe to do a project with me. And he saw these pieces that I just showed you before, and he loved these pieces and said, let's do a story about your sofa. Let's tell the story of a sofa instead of talking about a person. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And so what we did is actually we showed the life of the sofa on stage in the Centre Pompidou. So it started with the making of the sofa. This is the prototype. This is actually the real prototype, and it's also I brought also in the real people. So these are actually the craftsmen that do the piece. I brought them on stage. They were totally stressed out, but happy in the end. And yeah, so some people were real, also like us too. And then some people were actually professional actors. Sorry. So the whole play starts with a discussion between the two of us. So we talk about the complexity of doing something, the difficulty of doing something, and so he said, "Yeah, I like this piece, but what is it? It's a sofa, but it isn't a sofa." And so he asked me to sit in the sofa, and I'm kind of uncomfortable. So I can't manage to sit on my own sofa, and then I ask him to sing, and he will be unable to sing, and yeah. And then the sofa actually, then other people come in. So here you have actually my real gallerists in real life, which are the two partners of Carpenter's Workshop Gallery. So I brought them on stage, and they play the scene where they sell the sofa in a fair. And to a couple of collectors, which are two professional actors, which is Ludivine Sagnier and Eric Cantona. So we were lucky enough to get, especially Eric Cantona, which is like a monument. He was great to do it in a very professional way. And yeah, so then we went to different scenes. So those two, they purchased the sofa, and then they live with the sofa. But as it's a sofa where you're not just comfortably sitting in, but it's a sofa that asks you back some questions about how to use it and like what is comfort actually. In the end, the sofa kind of fucks up the relation between the two of them. So it's kind of a catalyzer of things that are not okay in their couple, which sometimes objects can play that role also, like very small things in daily life can play this role. So there were different scenes. We had like a no exhibition design, almost was all white, but we played a lot with light. We had a great light designer, so the different ambiances. This was like a nightmare scene where Eric Cantona has this nightmare. And then we had some dancers. There was this snake woman that was coming close to Ludivine. And this I have to say was the final scene. This was very much more like the brain of Philippe Catherine. Like, this is a friend of his, and the guy was playing the museum. How you call it? The one who takes care of the storage. And he was actually the one that was the most comfortable with this sofa. He loved this sofa because the end of the story is that the sofa ends in the museum stock. No. In a storage, because the couple, they sell it again. And well, anyway, it was a little complex story. The guy found this portrait of someone that looks totally like him, but it was someone shot at this portrait. And anyway, it was kind of a crazy story in the end.
Yeah, I think we wanted to talk a little bit about this project.
Yes.
Because it has so many elements there, and which it talks about the way we understand your design. And first is not only you make one piece and it's made and you move on. Is this revisiting of this piece is really interesting. Like you say, the new versions, they get more sophisticated, but also you start looking at it as another thing. It can be part of a performance and becomes a very different thing. It's not only a piece of furniture. It was never only a piece of furniture. It defines a space. It changes the way you behave in a space. You enter a room and these pieces. I remember when you designed this, and I was, wow, this is really interesting because the crossover of a space and objects and how it became architecture, objects, and how you behave with this thing that your body has to respond to it was very interesting. But also these other ways in which you start developing this as entering different disciplines, for saying, into performance, theater, and also the way in which you photograph this work is really also very interesting, how you communicate, because it's very different to experience this with your body than what we get to see here, which is images of this work. So
I think, yeah, also like the power you give to this type of piece by putting it all alone in the space. It's also in the scene is very interesting because evidently it generates by itself a type of presence and a dialogue and interaction with the people. And you raised something interesting, how you said there's like no set design really, but I think that, you know, the interaction of the people all being there and the moods that they generate with this lighting, it's just very simple, but it also works really well with the way we have to, in a way, react or behave to a piece that is recognizable, as you said, as something we can sit on, but how or not exactly explain. I mean, this happens also like in another project you show later. It's also interesting how you don't hesitate sometimes to multiply these like functions or like different positions in interacting with an object.
So just a question about the way in which there are elements which are familiar, so we very easily engage with it as a sofa, like the the way in which it's made, which is, you say, it speaks furniture. And do you on purpose use this, an element that makes it recognizable, so you can do the other element which allows you to get lost in the object, or is this part of a strategy, or is it accidental?
Well, I have to say this is actually the second time I used this kind of technique in the similar kind of shape. Probably the one you remember was the first one because we met in the 50s.
She was red.
This was it was a longer time ago, and in this first piece I will show it afterwards. It's I wouldn't call it a strategy, but it was just part of the idea that there was an idea of vanishing of different things, vanishing of what this kind of furniture speaks about, which are like bourgeois values, and also then vanishing of the object itself. And so with this other piece, it's maybe more clear because there was also a big sofa, and then there were just little pools that were left, and those are really like abstract. They're not really furniture anymore, but they still speak, as you say, about furniture because of the quilted technique. So yeah, and it was an idea to show this through like a unfrozen image, like as if this was a process of vanishing. So the sofa goes away, and then there's just one little piece in the end that's there, and so it's like if you take a freeze frame of this process of this disappearance. So this is another, let's say, untypical context for a designer to work in. The first one was stage, which was like, it was the first time, by the way, I did something with a stage. And this is the first time I did something in a church. This was for Nuit Blanche in Paris. You have this in Switzerland? You know what it is?
Yeah, we have it.
Well, it's basically an art festival where the whole night you have installations, artworks all over the city, and people, they get a map and they go all around the city. It's a very popular event. And so in this session, the art director of that year, which I don't remember, it was, they picked some churches for artists to intervene. And so yeah, they invited me to do this in St. Paul Church in the Marais in Paris. So I suddenly was confronted with a church and questions like, what is it to believe? And because I'm not a practicant, it's kind of not something that's part of my life, or even less my daily life. So I started to visit the churches, and I thought it's incredible that we have these huge, incredible spaces that are mostly empty all the time, especially in a very dense, competitive urban context today. And the few people that are there are totally different. You cannot categorize them at all. Once I was there was a punk, and there was an old lady, and then there was a student, and so I thought that's very interesting, and And then there was the idea to, just kind of to materialize this big question of like, what is faith? And even if for someone like me who is not going to church, I'm of course also shaped by religion and by the history, because it's just part of our history. So the installation was, you entered the church, and then from the central perspective you saw this. And then when you walked around in the church, this symbol started to disassemble, because it was actually an anamorphosis, and all the lighting spheres have different diameters. So when they look the same, but in reality they have different diameters because they are placed in different distances. So it's kind of you start, you come in, you saw this, then you saw this, and you said, okay, I got it. And then you walked around, and it totally disassembles. And when you have finished your circle, you're again in front of the question, basically.
So in a way, you get to see the light. You don't know what it is. Then you
Yeah,
see
there
it
are
when you
some,
come
let's
back.
say, I hope, some subtle references also to the context of a church, because there's the light. It gave a beautiful light, actually, because these things, they're actually, I didn't design them. They are made for movies, for night shooting, for movie scenes. So this was the only light that was there. And also what was kind of interesting in relation to the values of religion is that they are filled with helium, so they were uplifting. As against to the chandeliers in the church that are very impressive also because they're hanging. It's the opposite. They're hanging from the ceiling. And also, of course, this was very practical for us to move it around on the ground and not having to build a crazy structure, which would have been impossible anyway. It was very interesting project, also a lot of experimentation, because these optical effects are always a surprise, even with all the 3D that we do before. And we couldn't test it. We wanted to have a day before to install it, but there was a marriage in the church just the day before. And the couple, they just didn't want to get married underneath a question mark. I don't know why.
I wonder why.
Would you?
I thought that would have been cool, but they didn't like the idea. So we just had the same day to do it. Yeah, and another heavy subject, which is death, and in particular the death of my father. And so the question came up what to do with this grave. My family started to look at catalogs, and I thought they were all horrible. So I said, I'm going to design the grave. So the idea was a very basic, simple idea to design like a bed. And the bed was made out of stone for the frame. And the two cushions, the stone of the frame is granite. The two cushions are a Greek marble, and then there was like the bed cover was just the greenery.
I mean, the pillows look extremely real, even though we understand that they are real, but like in marble. So there's some sort of like comforting kind of. I think you're trying to also portray like this kind of. Evidently the presence, but there's also in a way a sense of comfort there, which I think is like very, very well executed. But it's also a bit like what we were kind of commenting before again, just to make a bit of a comment, is that I mean it's crazy how just including this single object of the pillow all of a sudden evidently with the combination of the grass and everything. It generates a totally different story, and it becomes a totally different object within the space. And and there's also like you always want to kind of know if there's a certain story about a certain tomb or something. And this is in a way kind of like saying this or providing some sort of an idea of a story, I think. And I imagine this was probably what you also were trying to create.
I was basically trying to find something that also went with the character of my father, who was more like a discreet person. I don't know if I really succeeded in that. Maybe I had a theoretical idea, because I realized that all the graves that are designed or custom made, they go vertical, because it's like, I don't know what, an erection, or they try to show that you're important, no? So they want to be seen. And he was like very discreet, so I thought something that's flat would kind of fit to him. And and it was a very interesting experience, this project, because at one point you have like a dossier in your computer, like many others for projects, and because you deal with the same questions than any other project, prices and negotiation and material and technique and authorization, and but still it's a very different project.
Which you had to battle for, no? A little bit?
Sorry?
Did you have to battle for it a little bit, or?
Yeah, it actually took a while for them to decide, because they are kind of, they have their rules in a cemetery, like you cannot do anything. So there, with this one, they didn't know what to do, because it was on one hand not offensive, but it was totally different. So they were like, a little bit uncomfortable with it in the beginning, but then it was okay. But I also like to do chairs and like things like a designer is or was supposed to do. Show you, I think, 2 or 3 projects like of trying to be a good designer. So this is a chair I designed for Tonnet, where the idea was the context was actually restaurants that I designed in Paris, and they had a contact to Tonnet, and they wanted me to make like a customization of a Tonnet chair, and I thought, this will be the 100th or 1,000th comment on the number 14 chair, and let's try to design a new chair. So I figured out what was about this chair. What can you do with such an icon? So I found out that one thing that was my starting point, I thought interesting, is that this Tonnet chair, the number 14, is today a very expensive chair, or rather expensive chair. And it's a total contradiction with the history of the chair, because it got so successful because it was inexpensive, and because it was it could be taken apart and sent out all in the world. So and why the chair is expensive is basically because of this big back part that is in one piece, and it's still like craftsmen that have to put it in the mold, and the mold has to rest for hours in the stove, and it's like kind of nothing changed after maybe 60 million chairs produced since.
But it got more expensive every year.
Yeah, it got more expensive every year for sure, and working condition and regulation changed, and there were of course different reasons for that. But so what I did is that, like in a drawing, when you simplify a curve with straight lines, I did that with this big back part, and also taking into consideration the production facilities that they have there with a 3D milling machine, and so we changed this backrest into machine milled elements. That also had another advantage to the number 14, is that we didn't need a ring anymore below the seat, because this triangle made this chair stronger.
So you removed a component. Yeah.
Well, I removed the component, but it doesn't have less components because the other elements are together. But still, what did work is the chair is much cheaper. And I did this with Tonnet Frankenberg. Maybe you know there are 2 Tonnets, 2 real one, and then there are a lot of copies. and the number 14 in the German Tonnet is called 214. So I baptized my chair 107, which is like half, because the target was to make it half price, and we kind of almost managed. We're like 60%.
I think what is hard is that you do successfully is to keep the spirit. Is you see the chair and you recognize the spirit of the other chair. And to make versions of chairs is so hard.
Yeah.
To what is the line of, I don't know, is what do you do to do something? And so it has a new identity, enough for you to feel it's a new chair, but also it has enough of the other identity to maintain this. I think in that case it's very successful. Also because, I don't know, it's something I see in your work, that this narrative of these stories, that they bring things from the past, and there is a very fluid relationship of the past and the present in the objects. And I don't know, again, if this is something that you are conscious of it, or it just, so you have this ability to bring this.
I mean, I do like the history of objects, and I will see it later in an exhibition where I integrated lots of historical objects also. In this case, it was kind of, you couldn't escape it to think about what has been done. But in general, you're right, yeah, I like to work with the continuum of things, yeah. And this is another chair I more recently designed. But also here is like it's a continuation of a history of a certain chair, which is the typical chair which you find in terraces in Paris. Yeah. And this is made also like the tonnet by the historical company called Drucker, and they produce the normal chair, the original chairs since 1880. And so we tried to do something new. Again, the question, what can you do with this chair that is, if it's still around since 1880, it means there must be something interesting about it. And it definitely is. So those chairs are very resistant. They're light. They are kind of charming because they have this natural material, which is rattan.
Stackable as well.
Sorry?
Stackable as well.
They don't
to a certain extent.
They don't stack very well, and that's one point where I intervened. They're kind of stackable, and they have these irregularities in the material, and they are silent also, which is interesting. They don't make too much noise. So I came up with this. This is stackable.
I'm saying that on purpose because you see this picture. And
we made this picture because, so basically what I found out when I researched on the chair is the two main problem that the original chair, which you see on the right, has, is that it stacks not very well. There's a lot of lost space between them. And the other one is that the legs made out of rattan, the humidity comes from underneath, and if you now watch the next time you're in Paris, you will see they're all gray because they get humid. So the idea was so actually this rattan material is great for the upper part of the chair, but not for the legs. So that's kind of where the idea came, to make aluminum legs and to combine it with a traditional.
I recently watched a documentary about this company and how they were making them. I was really impressed by actually how labor intensive it is also to produce all the weaving and everything. And that's why I found it also kind of interesting to see how, and again a bit like on the previous chair, like, you know, you're talking about different periods and moments, and you're not forgetting all of this, you're simply making a note about it, and also expressing what you're thinking about as a designer, and where there's benefits or interests in intervention and stuff. And so I think it's interesting to give it like kind of a different also, not life, but like a different aesthetics maybe, than by associating something that's a little bit more of an industrial process, such as the aluminium bending, and very simple to just produce. And so yeah, and this is for a cafe, you said, or it was for?
No, I originally designed it actually for the same restaurant, which is now a little chain that I designed many years ago. but that's just how it started. Now it's in the catalog of the company, and like the tonnet chair, and it's available to everybody. Yeah.
And by doing this, has it become a bit? Because I think they're quite expensive, these chairs, no?
No, it's
has you managed to make it a bit more affordable? Or?
This
chair
I don't know. They were saying like these cafes in Paris, they buy so many, but they're like, yeah, it's like, I don't know how many euros, like 300-400 euros a chair or something, like quite a lot, maybe even more. And they were saying that like, yeah, but it's an investment, they last forever. And
yeah, no, they're not that expensive. They're actually, they have a politic, this company, they have a politic to really focus on the contract market. Okay. So they are, those chairs are expensive in that kind of price range for the private end customer. Okay. But for a cafe owner, they're half price of that. Yeah. They're around 200.
Because sometimes they make like personal versions for a specific cafe as
almost
well.
Always.
Almost always, yeah.
That's like the weaving you can do, it's endless what you can do
exactly.
in terms of pattern and in terms of color and color combination. And that's also what like made the chair successful, that each cafe can adapt it to their style. But our chair, this chair, it's 10% cheaper than their cheapest chair.
Okay.
So,
good.
And cheaper also for transport. Yeah, because you can put more in a box. Oh yeah, that's a third design project which I did for Lobmeyer, the traditional Austrian crystal company, and that took me a long time because here it was very difficult to find a flaw or somewhere to because also
I like
nothing.
That they're finding the flaw too.
Nothing changed in there because a glass. What can you do? I didn't want to do like a chandelier or something. I didn't want to combine. It's just a personal thing. I didn't want to combine different other elements, other materials with the crystal. I wanted to have just a crystal, and then let's just do a glass. But the glass, nothing has changed. Our hand didn't change. Our mouth didn't change. The way they produce those glasses kind of never changed. So yeah, in the end we found this little idea of making the decor functional, because they are famous actually for engraving, for their engravings. So we have these how do you say these ribs, these engravings that are like a ribbon or like a sticky tape. It's actually called scotch, and it's also a scotch. It's for drinking scotch. And as you can see on the glass, it's they have two different heights on the glass, and they are actually volume indicators for the whiskey. And on the bottle, it's on the top, and there it's like it kind of references the paper strip that's usually on a sealed bottle. Yeah. So this is another typology of project, which is public space. And this was a project in Nancy where I was asked to do it was a competition actually that we won, and it was about doing an intervention on this historical building, which they have galleries inside and also a concert hall. So I did a double intervention. One was on the facade with these discs you can see, and the other one was in front with furniture. The one for the facade there was also the question to make something that's almost like between art and signage system. So it should be something that is interesting, that has a concept, that has an idea, but it also it went together with a whole urbanistic project with the new station, train station in Nancy, and this was in an axis that got a pedestrian zone, so you can see the building from far away. And the idea was like to catch an attention. So we put these discs that actually took the colors of the facade, like typical colors of this historical building. We put them in a rotation just on the computer and printed it. And then, so it's like a slight disturbance of this historical facade, because Nancy is quite a rich city, and they are full of kind of nice stone buildings there, and people don't even look at them anymore. And so it was a way to say that there is something actually. And then when the light changes, there's a backlight that goes on progressively with a sensor, and then the more the light goes on, the more the motif disappears, and in the end, it's like a black hole, like an eclipse on the building. And the second part of the project, was that it was using the same stone of the building and also the same grout color and rhythm of the grouts, and to make this kind of extension of the historical building, which created a piazza-like situation in front, because, as I said, it became pedestrian. So people are gathering there before a concert starts or in the pause, and yeah. So it was kind of links, also to what I said in the beginning. It's almost like when you see it from far away, it's like the same stone. It's almost a camouflage, or as if it's been there, and then.
But that's what is very interesting in terms of how becomes architecture, or is it objects architecture, and you change what is the architecture itself. Is these additions, in a way, they are more like growths rather than to put one piece of furniture or to put one light on the building.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting, this how the objects become part of the space. So it's not adding things on the space, but just unifying all of this as one thing. And
also like to make a bridge between architecture and furniture, they're like elements of architecture. Like this could be like an element of the facade, but then they are also, it's like a bar stool for people.
I think also it has an ease to approach, which is very interesting, is because these objects they don't look like the common bench or the common chair, but yet again it's very easy, you see, and your body really adapts to it. So that's really interesting how it has this organic element added to architecture, which is very straight and sharp and cold, and so.
Yeah, that's true. Just for the anecdote, one thing we had a problem with this project, one thing we didn't think about was the skaters. And they were like... I'm
actually going to ask you how it aged with with the intervention of the public.
It aged a lot in the first week, and then we stopped the aging by putting... actually, I put the most discreet thing I found was I put a metal piece, but in the grout. So it's like as if the grout at one suddenly has a little bump, and then it stops just right away because it's not interesting for them anymore to slide on that. But yeah, we didn't think about it. And so a year later, this Galerie Poirel, that's the name of the place we just saw, they invited me to do an exhibition of my work, and I decided to, rather to show only my own work, I decided to curate an exhibition, which was something I've never done before, and to investigate a theme that I was always interested in, but more in a more intuitive way. So it was the occasion to dig and to find out what's really about that. And this theme was like, you could just call it things. It was about things that don't tell us right away what they are. So they kind of are challenging for us because they ask us a question. It's like as if an object becomes active. And instead of just being a nice chair and you use it and you're happy with it, this is something first, maybe you don't even know what it is. You have to figure out if you can do something with it. You don't even know if it's functional or not, because in this exhibition there were artists and also designers. So it was about this dynamic relationship to have with an object. And it was about unrecognizable things. And the exhibition was called Quiz.
This is great with this forever question of, I think, well, when I started in design, you were already working for 5 years or so. But we have seen design changing a lot. I was just thinking back on, we saw the beginning of the explosion of the press design. Before, when the press publications about design. Before that, you will have the domus, blueprint, like very punctual architecture, mainly in magazines. And then in the 90s, started all these new publications, wallpaper, etc. And it really changed the panorama of design. And it happened when we were starting, and I mean, you were already more established. And then it was this question of, still on those days, it was this, design was not as industrial production. But then in your own work, you start experimenting, and because you are inquiring through your work and through design, your work is taking you in different places. And this is a forever question of art and design. We're always facing this, what is art, what is design, or are you crossing the boundaries? So it doesn't matter. And I think in this exhibition, what is interesting is you deciding I'm not going to show my work. I'm going to do an exhibition to think about this issue, this subject of what is an object, and I have to think about what this thing is, and I don't care where it comes from. And the quiz is, it's up to you to start deciding what you see. Because at the end, I find is the only way. I can't explain what is art or what is design. I can talk
you're
about.
right. It was actually definitely also a reaction to this question that I always got from people. That so are you an artist or a designer? And what is this art or is this design? And I think my main I have to say because I invited someone to co-curate this with me, who is Alexis Vaillant. Who didn't know much about design at that time, but he is very sharp in contemporary art. So I had a very good partner to do this together. And our main thinking, or what we wanted to say here, it's not about finding out what is this art or is this design, or what does make something functional or not functional. One thing what is important is that we said that the function cannot be the thing the notion to distinguish art from design, because that's what's the easiest, and people always say, so okay, this is functional, this is design. I mean, art has totally a function as well, and of course, and the main reason for this to say this was to say that function has a total different importance for art than for design. For design, it's compulsory, which doesn't mean you have to be functional, but you always have to deal with function in one way or the other, and you cannot even help it because it's in the genes of a designer. It's like they're born like that, and the function is always like either they're just neatly corresponding to function, or they can pervert function or play with it, but function is always there. And for art, function can be there, but totally cannot be there as well. So it just doesn't have the same position. So it cannot be the point to differentiate art from design.
But even in design, it's not so much that the object has a function, but first is you will be through a design process and you use the language of design. So sometimes it can be that objects, they don't have a function per se, as you say, or sitting, or a typological function that we can recognize, but it can have many other functions. It can be a social interrogation. It can be, so it's also the question of what is function in design has changed. I don't know. Was this part of the addressing this?
You mean how function has changed?
Yeah, more purely based
in
on
design?
shape. Yeah.
It had to do with shape, also because this was something else that I'm very interested in. I'm very interested in form, and I think form is something totally absolute and intriguing and interesting, and sometimes it's undervaluated. Like sometimes when we have a concept, we think the thing is done, and we just translate the concept.
I'm with you. Form is.
And I think form is incredibly important. So in this exhibition, form absolutely played a role. So all the objects had a kind of sophisticated, elaborated form. It was not just a concept or not just a comment. So that was a way to narrow it down, because this subject anyway, it's so large. I mean, for example, we could also have integrated nature-made, like found objects in this quiz, and say, okay, who did this? There were many other possibilities, but this was already very large theme, so we focused on this idea, and of form was part of it. So
I'm also interested from a space point of view. Like, it's very interesting because you don't want to necessarily categorize, or you definitely don't want. So, but I see that you've also designed things at different kind of heights or levels. So evidently this has a bit of an incidence on what do we read at a certain way. I mean,
absolutely.
Are these all like things you were kind of like, oh, now I'm like also wanting to do this kind of show, I have to think about all these things. Like, how was it to set all this? And I mean, it must have been extremely...
No, it was big fun.
And why blue? And I mean, I have ideas why, but you know.
No, we had great fun. Part of the fun came that I'm not a curator, and I was doing this for the first time, so I didn't feel the weight of a curator on my shoulders. I felt quite free, and and the other thing that Alexis told me at one point, which always stayed in my mind, is that every form of every exhibition is a manipulation of the exhibited works. So we must not forget that. We cannot do just the most, like a purely documentary doesn't exist. So we even went right in there. So some objects, we placed them at unusual heights to make them even more quizzy. For example, we had an incredible shoe from Zaha Hadid, which is like chrome piece, really like a thing, you wouldn't know what it is. And so when we placed it like right above the eye height, so you could not see where your foot goes in, so it became even more a strange thing. So we actually we went in this direction. And the blue came from the idea of having things floating on a neutral background, like the blue in the video, kind of also representing what happens in the internet. Is the most diverse things are all together without any hierarchy, as less shadow possible, with a homogeneous light against this blue. And then concerning exhibition design, this was a very nice space actually they have there. This was 1,000 square meters. There were two symmetrical galleries of 350 square meters, so this is one, and this is the other one. So I was thinking of how can I do something that makes sense, also in the way of progressing in the exhibition. So it was this just a slight change of, in the first gallery you had this blue wall. Well, the massive presence of blue was an idea of being immersive, being really in this yourself in this blue space. And then in the first gallery it was almost down to the floor, but not on the floor because that's difficult conservation-wise for the object. And in the middle there was this platform like a sushi go-go, where the objects, well, it was still, they didn't move. And then in the other gallery it was kind of the same, but as if the curtain was lifted. So we went to a height of a shelf, and but the platform was lowered in the sense that it was just one main big platform, and that allowed us also to place the more voluminous objects. And then in between the two, to get from one gallery to the other, there was a mezzanine space that we used for. I designed this structure where there were workshops held, and people could consult the catalogs of the artists and designers. I didn't mention, but there were 100 participants. There were 50 artists and 50 designers, and it ranged from a Cal diploma student project to Donald Judd. So there was also no hierarchy in terms of
I was wondering
names.
How the criteria of selection was generated. And
well, the criteria, what I experienced also again as a first-time curator was actually quite a pleasure for me to, you have to stick to your concept. So For example, there were some objects that I loved, but in the end I didn't take them because it would have made the message blurry. So you have to stick to your idea, and that's how we choose the objects. And we were also free of, there were no political whatever things that, constraints that made us having to put this or that. So that's why the diversity was also so big.
And also what you think about, because the position of a designer curating, that you also design the exhibition design. That's a very interesting place. How do you see this different to somebody who is the curator and then works with the exhibition designer, or the power you had to be both? And did it help, the fact that you were both curating and devising the space? Did it make you think differently about the selection, or what's the difference, you think, from your experience, to be only a curator or only an exhibition designer, to be the curator, exhibition designer, the total, taking into account that you had a collaborator, but
this collaborator was actually very important in that project, because he was a very good and very strong sparring partner. He, as I said, he comes from the world of contemporary design. He was actually the chief curator of CAPC Bordeaux for 7 years. And mainly museum people or art people are not used to exhibition design that much as we are in design. They're more like in the white cube situation most of the time. It's also a budget question. They usually spend most of the budget for transport, insurance, and sometimes production. And then exhibition design, in the end, it's like, it would be nice to do something, but we have no money. So the advantage of being both was that in the beginning on, we isolated some money for the exhibition design, which enabled us to do this, for example. And then also with my partner, we really have to fight for your ideas. It was really a challenge because, as I said, he was not used to such a strong exhibition design. So everything, it had to be there for a reason, and which is obvious anyway, but it's nicer if you have a dialogue in that sense. So this was the view from the South Gallery, from the top. We really were lucky. We had a good budget, so we could also bring some amazing pieces. Those are 2 France West in the first, the ones with the France West colors. It was also like a 95% contemporary selection. We just had in the very beginning, it's what you saw in the first picture, I put some, like maybe 3 or 4 objects, historical objects, because of course I was not the first one to trigger this theme, but there were some people that are very important for that and very important for me, like Richard Archwager, who did this piece, the very first piece you see on your right, which is one of the blips. You're probably familiar with the blips. The blips is like kind of emblematic for this theme in the exhibition. It's really the essence of a thing. It refuses to be a sculpture. It invades space. It was the idea of a certain shape that could also take on different materialities. Sometimes it was wood, sometimes it was just a sticker. And he placed those blips, as he called them, in different locations. And then there was the big piece in front is Friedrich Kiesler, also very good to illustrate this subject. These are called the Coriolis T'k Instruments. So they were also things where you look at it, you wouldn't know exactly what it is, and actually when it's standing, they were designed for the first Surrealist exhibition of Peggy Guggenheim in New York. So when they were upright standing like this, they were like a pedestal for sculptures. And then when you flip them down on that side, they make a chair. And you flip them down on the other side with the flat part on top, they would make a low table. Behind that, you see a tiny dot, a pink dot, That's a Bruno Monari paper sculpture, big like this, which he called Sculture di Viaggio. It's like a little paper thing that you can carry with you. Yeah. Okay, well, and one last thing maybe that was very interesting for us, also for me in this exhibition, is like what we do today when we search. We go on Google, and when you search on design, and then you get the real piece, we didn't get a lot of surprises. But with art, it's very different because you can't predict the scale. So when you see this blue piece, which is from Heimut Sobernik, on Google, then you think, okay, this can be a poof or something, and actually it's monumental. This was 2.50 meters high. And also with the other piece on the other side, the white piece, this, like when you see it as a little image, it could be a coat hanger. But then it's not a coat hanger, it's a sculpture, because it's done by an artist, and it was also kind of massive. So the scale question was interesting there. Yeah, and then also, not to be too coherent until the end, we also had some objects that escaped this blue space, and that we put in this freely in space. So this is a very nice galvanized steel Donald Judd sculpture. A not so nice piece from Mendini behind. I love Mendini, but this piece was not the best, I think. Those you probably know. Maybe the first one, it's Karin Rugaber, artist. Then the Ron Arad, we put it there because it was just killing everything else around it when it was on the platform. So we put it in the corner there. That was okay. I don't know, how are we with time?
Yeah,
should speed up.
Sandra, don't. Encore 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
Okay, then I don't tell you anymore about this exhibition. We were lucky enough also to have not only exhibition design planned in the budget, but a catalog.
That's nice.
This illustration is very nice.
Very
yeah.
nice sketch. Yeah.
What we design now.
This is the like kind of crazy list of participants in the exhibition.
It's exhaustive.
Yeah. Well, if you have 5 minutes left, then I don't show you this one. I show you and I don't show you. So it was an exhibition in the Palais de Tokyo where I did the exhibition design, but the curator was someone else. Yeah, maybe I go directly to this one, which was my first big institutional show in the Kunsthalle Dresden. And there I showed, so as we were like a team that had fun, Alexis and I invited him to be the curator of the show, but it was like a very fluid exchange. So here I showed 25 of my own works, and then the director of the museum, it's not a museum actually, it's a Kunsthalle, he invited me to integrate pieces from the Dresden State Collection. They have 8 museum collections there, which are totally incredible, covering basically everything from porcelain, Meissen porcelain, curiosity cabinets, antique, old masters painting, etc. So I chose in the end 23 of those works of the state collections. Then there were another 6 works of contemporary art of my own collection, and then 2 objects of everyday use, which was a big box of protein, like for bodybuilders, and of course, and an electronic cigarettes, like 2 objects representing the absurdities of today. So there was some images of the exhibition, whereas always a mix of my own works together with the works of Dresden.
And how did you decide which pieces to add to your exhibition, and how did you create the tension?
That's a little, we don't really have enough time because there were like 5 themes in the exhibition that would take a little long now to explain those 5 themes. That was mainly also Alexis' part to elaborate 5 themes that characterize my own work, and then we chose. It was a very long process. For my objects was not so difficult, but for the other objects, in the beginning I had like 200, and then we scaled it down, and in the end, but it was very good to do that. And in the end, we had these 23 pieces I selected, and ranging from Lucas Cranach, which you see here, which they just lent to us amazingly. But another object would be a small Egyptian stone that I thought was very interesting. First, because nobody knew what it was, but it was still in the museum collection. And also the shape was very interesting because it was exactly halfway between a sphere and a cube. So it was total ambiguity of who did that. Was it nature? Was it man? Is there a function? Isn't there a function? Is it symbolical? Is it a game? Is it related to the hand? So yeah, there were some masterpieces, some anonymous objects, some objects from Meissen. This was some views from the mezzanine.
But also, how does this process affect the way in which you understand your own work? Because when you prepare an exhibition and you start doing a selection and you rethink, I don't know, it's a moment to rethink your work, and these combinations with other objects, how do they affect the way in which you understand? Does it affect the way in which you see your work, or do you see it later? Because I guess in the moment it's very hard, but when you look back.
Yeah, I think it's a process. I think by now I'm used to the idea that I don't invent so much in the end. But I do remember when I started working, and at one point I had to do, it was a job. I did the selection for in a kind of encyclopedia of applied arts, and I did the selection for Austria. So for 6 months I went to his history of objects, and I was totally paralyzed after that to do my own work, because I was just said, oh my God, everything is there already, there's nothing to do. And I kind of got over that, and so now it doesn't affect me that much anymore.
No, but I don't mean that way. I think, personally, every time, even preparing a lecture or a presentation, is a way to reassess our work. I find these moments really a moment to rethink what you do, or to understand, or it gives you get closer and also distance to your work. So I wonder whether when you did this exhibition, if after when you finish the exhibition, you get out of it this other view of your own work, or is...
Yeah, and I can't really answer that. Maybe I did, but maybe these are processes that come later.
Yeah.
It's like the cat, when you call a cat, it comes 5 minutes later. So it sure influences you when you, because I spent like 6 months digging into the most incredible collections, but I couldn't say like right away what...
No, I don't mean about the other work, I mean about your own work.
Yeah, but what effect it had on my own work, that's what you mean.
No, but not so much about all the joining with other pieces of work, but the process of when you do these exhibitions, when you do these selections, and when you do your own, the exhibition of your own work, if on the selection of the objects... How do you understand
your work? Yeah.
In the selection of the objects is a moment when you rethink your practice, or is...
Yeah, maybe when you go back to what we said before, it just confirms this idea for me that what is most important for me, that was also the thinking that I had after the quiz exhibition, is what does a thing to you, what does an object to you, and what can you do with it? Do in the largest sense, not just function or... and that's why I was interested in those objects that don't tell you right away what to do with it. And this just gets stronger and stronger when you see objects in history, because this is like really, this is the thread the thread is not art or design because there was techne in the ancient Greek, and then it was more mixed together, and it doesn't matter. It's just what can do when you put something in front of you. What can you do with it? Can you do something with it? Something interesting. For the exhibition design, the most important part of the exhibition design was this wall. In the end, I was kind of pushing what I did at Quiz with this idea of floating objects all together in the same space. So here we were able to build a huge light wall, and the objects were attached to the wall. So the idea was to show something like an cutout image on Photoshop, because the objects were shadowless, because the light came from behind. It was really quite an interesting effect to see these things floating. And also this gave a kind of a dramaturgy to the exhibition, because this light came from behind. You walk through the light. When you go this or this direction, it had a total different feelings. The object looked different.
It's also a bit like how you discover objects maybe on the internet, because there's a relationship you also made about the title, which was really interesting, which is a very nice, maybe you want to talk. I know we don't have much time.
Yeah, the title of this show was You May
really
Also
nice.
Like Robert Stadler. So like the phrase that pops up when the algorithm thinks he understands what you like, what you might also like. So that was also, of course, in relation to this project I did there, because it was kind of saying, if you like what I do, then you might also like what I chose in the Dresden State collection, and then you might also like what I collect as an art collector. So it reflected this dynamics. This is the book. Well, let's do it fast. Well, I have 2 more projects, but it's as you want. I can stop here if you want.
I'm not the boss, unfortunately.
Well, I can say a few words, and then we do it fast. Yeah, the
just
rest you
go
can
through.
check it out.
You have so many other nice projects still in the slides, so let's,
So this was a project that was kind of simultaneously with the one in Dresden. I got this huge privilege to show my work in the Noguchi Museum in New York, and the curator, who is Dakin Hart, he combined Noguchi's work together with mine. And as he put it, as you can see in the invitation here, like this is one of my works accessorized with Noguchi. I would have not dared to say something like that, but he is very free mind. So I don't know if you have ever been to that place. If you haven't, I really recommend to go. It's a wonderful place with a Japanese garden. It's all designed by Noguchi himself. So here we put some objects of mine in relation to Noguchi sculpture, which is like kind of the biggest clash you can get, because these sculptures are really massive, and my object was again talking about vanishing and disappearing of a piece of furniture, plastic furniture. This also is emblematic for what was in the show, because this is a piece of Noguchi leaning or confronting a piece of mine. Here you can see it again, the backside of my piece, and the Noguchi with the kind of the Felix the cat tail. Yeah, so the exhibition was not in one space; it was spread out different rooms. So it was more like a parcours in the Noguchi Museum. This is a Noguchi sculpture on a table of mine. This was like our favorite room. It combined the stoneworks of mine together with Noguchi kind of functional sculpture, because he had a long-term relation with Martha Graham Theatre Company, and these were painted plywood pieces that he designed for the stage, for the dancers to interact with.
I think also you didn't mention those materials that you use, that they are fake, all these prints that they look like marble, but they're cardboard. And
yeah, the wood prints, yeah. The marble was actually real marble, but cut so thin that it's almost like it was kind of the idea that to keep only the image of marble or the image of luxury, but it was cut with a special technique.
So it was actually marble.
It's marble. Yeah, but it's only 5 millimeter thin.
And then you put it on a
Aluminium honeycomb boards.
Oh.
Yeah. But then I had another project where we printed. This was a wood project in. That's a different one. This was the piece I was referring before, the first one where I worked with the quilted technique, and it was combined with Noguchi Akari sculpture. The idea here was that both works talk about like a non-definite form. Like there's not a perfect form. My work was about like vanishing or a process, an ongoing process of mutation of furniture in that case. And Noguchi actually designed about 200 versions of the paper Akari lamp. So there's also not like the best one. It's just for him was like an ongoing process of shaping these things. So it's another very nice, unique piece of Noguchi.
But this is something while you carry on, we tell our students, which is your work is a continuum. So when you start as a student, you already are beginning to work, and your work is going to be not what you do your final project, but it will be a continuation. I think in your work you see this constant flow of, it's not this project.
Like a process and never ending, that it starts from something that needs to continue, and even if sometimes it takes a break, you feel like there's sometimes elements of it you still want to explore, yeah.
That was a kind of an extension of the museum show that we did during a design fair there in a warehouse. Again, combination of, this is printed oak fabric combined with the Noguchi granite.
It's a big space.
Yeah, that's a warehouse. It was a very nice space in the fair, a space they usually don't use. This is like a walk-in Akari.
2 more minutes.
2 more minutes?
Yeah.
Well, the last one is easy because you probably have seen it. It was in Milano, 2018. Yes. A lot of people go to see Vitra. That's why I think you might have seen it. A show that I was curating and designing, and also designed a piece of furniture for that. So it was also kind of a complete immersion. And it was in this space called La Pelota.
Difficult space to miss.
I decided not to go in height, and there's also 2 minutes is like, I'd rather not say anything, because there's a lot to say about this exhibition.
It's the quiz now.
Well, we gave some indications. The main idea was to show the world of Vitra. So yesterday, today, tomorrow. So I could choose between the collection, the current production, and there were some specially commissioned objects. And my idea was to group those objects in not the usual design categories like seating, working, sleeping, etc., but like you could do it on social medias in communities. So there were the athletes, the compulsive organizers, the dreamers. So the objects basically were presented as characters. So here, for example, in the corner you see the Spartans. Those are the slashers. This is the beauty contestants. Those are the compulsive organizers. And this is the piece that I designed for the show together with Konstantin Gricic, Burlex, Barbara Osgerby in Commonplace Studio. We all designed a communal sofa for communal seating. So this was mine. This was a presentation at Orgatech in the next year, and I used the same fabric, like a 3D knitted fabric, like sneakers. And it was enabling people to sit in a communal situation, but you weren't obliged to. You could also sit normally like this man. He just didn't sit on the right one. He should have sit on the red sofa, not on the green.
Well, there was a big debate about whether, because we were going to ask so many things, whether we'd be actually capable to go through all the slides, and we did.
We did, yeah.
So,
I think
well
we're almost
done,
there.
Thank you. I really don't know if we have time for questions. Maybe if anyone would like to ask Robert something. But at least for us, thank you. I mean, I was like aware of your work. I knew it, and also Radi, etc. But also in a way to kind of have my idea of how you did these pieces and how you also did these exhibitions was also very interesting to kind of understand it in my way, but also then have the bit that was missing, which was, you know, the real way, the way you wanted it to be understood as well. But and so yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate to have been able to discover and exchange with you on your work. Yeah,
I think we enjoyed a lot discussing your work before we saw the work presented by you, because we were talking about
spend hours
questions, and it's just a great. But it's just a great opportunity to go through work, and is maybe a lot of things that, like you say, well, and also maybe I look at it later. But there is certainly a strength all through the work. I think the way you are able to combine all this, being the curator, the exhibition designer, also designing pieces, and it brings a strength to the project that maybe is hard to see from the inside, but certainly you can feel from the outside. So that, and this continuity on this kind of your approach to this past, present, and those elements that it's very easy to engage with the work when you also is vanishing. So you give enough to engage, because there are things you recognize, but also you bring these questions when you in the furniture and in the spaces and the products you produce. So we really enjoy our conversations. We really enjoy your presentation. Thank you for coming. And thank you for Talking Heads, for having Robert Stadler here.
Hi, thanks so much for the presentation. It was really interesting. And I'm just curious, in your exhibition quiz, so I didn't see any wall text in the exhibition, and I saw that there were numbers, and you put things at different heights to kind of blur the meaning or the context or what it is. So did the visitor ever get answers to the quiz? Was there like something to decipher? Did they get any help to answer the quiz?
Yeah, we tried to make a quiz that was not too easy, so we didn't help too much, but we did give something. There was like a leaflet for visitors where you could see purely technical information corresponding to the numbers. So you could see the title of the work, who did the work, the year, and I don't remember now if there were materials as well, but basically there were captions. But we didn't say like what it was, if it was something, because that would have been not coherent, because like with a design object you would have said chair, and if you're an art object you would have said what, like art, you know.
I just think it's interesting when we combine that with your big question mark in the church. It seems like you leave kind of questions with not so many answers, which is, I think, very impressive, because it leads people to question also what they see around them and how they themselves interpret the world, and then how they see art and design within the world. But I think it's also courageous to ask the questions and not give the answers.
Yeah, that was certainly the idea for this exhibition. And as I said before, we like to like underline this moment of what can you do with something when you don't have all the answers, when you are kind of out of context. That's also, I think it's interesting, because people sometimes complain when you say in a design exhibition, it's like, oh, great, but it's such a pity you can't sit on the chair, because in exhibitions you usually can't use the objects, no? But I don't think this is true, because you can sit on the chair in Habitat or in a shop or or at home, and then when you're in a different context, you can do something else with this object that you have in front of you. So I think the exhibition context is interesting for that.
Different contexts have different uses as well. Even if you put the same chair, but depending on the context, it has a different meaning. So absolutely. Thanks.
Well, thanks a lot for this presentation. I think that in a way, every work of an artist or a designer is a bit sedimentary, because you always add layers on previous generations, on people from your own generation. So it's always a work of reinterpreting what you have around and what you have in history. But I think that this is really one of the first time I have seen this extremely clear in your own particular work. I mean, like, for example, the tonnette chair, like the reinvention of the tonnette chair, the chairs in the coffees in Paris, or what you did for Vitra. So I think that to that extent, your work is very, as I said, sedimentary. You could say that there is a work of layering new interpretations. But at the same time, I think that the presentation was very interesting because I was very surprised to see how other people interpret your work, particularly Philippe Catherine, who is quite a character, but also like the couple who were about to get married in the church, kind of rejecting the work. And I'm very curious to see how you react to these interpretations by other people about your work in your own design.
I'm happy about the most diverse interpretations that I can get. I think this is one of the, so it's also one of the pleasures of design. Like when you're able to produce work that is distributed, and then people can have the most different kind of interpretations, or especially with work in public context, because it's people that don't choose this work, but they are kind of confronted with it, and you can also, you get feedback that is very different because it's also whatever, taxpayers that, in the end that can react on something when you did something that is made with with public money. So basically I enjoy those diverse interpretations that my work can do, because I have the feeling that I put a lot of thinking, or I put as much as I can in my work in constructing it, and I don't just throw it out. And then I'm happy if it goes out and people do with it whatever they want. I don't know if this answers what you were.
The question was more about like how does it influence in any way your practice, this feedback from different people, from society, basically.
I don't know if it really influences. It sounds terrible. I don't know. I think one thing is like the technical thing. When someone complains that the chair you designed is not comfortable, fine, and I try to do better next time. But I think with work that triggers other dimensions than the purely pragmatic ones, you feel yourself when you hit something or when you were doing not so good. I think I didn't get too much surprises in the end when I thought I did like one of my best works and then people hated it. It's more like harmonious, I have the feeling. Like I get sometimes not so much response, but when this happens, I kind of know why. And you know what I mean? So yeah, in the end, and I didn't get too much surprises actually out of that. Also, I know by now that like probably a big part of the thinking that you can put into an object is doesn't reach the end consumer or the receptor or viewer of an exhibition or whatever. But that doesn't really matter because I'm doing it because that's my way of doing it, and that's how I manage to put something out there. And I always pay attention also in the Vitra project. It's actually very, this came out very clear because Vitra, they have something like Mr. Fehlbaum has a phobia of pretentiousness. He hates when something could be pretentious. And pretentious can mean to be maybe intellectual, and then people don't understand it. So it makes someone feel stupid. So that would be something he would hate to do. So whatever I did for this project during the process was extremely argumented all the time. And I'm quite sure in the end, this story that about the communities, many people didn't get it because it was also Milano. There were millions of people. People go in and out in these kind of events. But I kind of thought about that before, and for me it's very important that the things that I do, they have also a visual or a formal, we were talking about form before, an impact that is very direct and not conceptual. You don't have to read anything before you get this. And then it's a multi-layered thing. And then when you're interested and you wonder like, okay, you think those things, they are arranged randomly, but then you walk around the exhibition and suddenly you see that there's a space between groups of objects. So there are groups. So what are these groups about? So people that want to go further, then they can do it. But yeah, it's important to me that this is not the only way to enter the project. You also have a strong, strong impact. Not cerebral impact in the beginning.
Thank you.